Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Today on Another View, an intimate conversation with Dr. Alvin J. Schexnider. He's a retired university president, board governance consultant to trustees and presidents of public and private colleges and universities nationwide, and an author. His latest book is called Confessions of a Black Academic, a memoir, where he shares how growing up during the civil rights movement shaped his perspective on race and education, and he has some advice for historically black colleges and universities fighting to stay viable in today's academic landscape. Stay tuned. Another View will be right back after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So what does it take to rise to the position of president of a college or university? Is it a different journey if you want to lead a predominantly white college or university versus an historically black college or university? Are the skill sets, leadership models, and institutional advancement challenges the same, or are they different? And what if you're a black male in this leadership role? Our guest today can answer all these questions and more. Dr. Alvin J. Schexnider is a former college president, a governance consultant, and an author. His latest book is called Confessions of a Black Academic, a memoir, and we welcome him to Another View. Hello there.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you very much. I'm truly honored to be here.
Thank you
so much.
Here. Absolutely. Yeah. So, first of all, audience, I did ask Dr. Schexnider if I could call him Alvin, and he said yes.
Yes.
So
that's my name.
So I always ask people because some people really want their titles, etc. Right. But before we get to all of that about schools and so forth, who is Alvin Schexnider?
He's a man approaching his eighth decade in life, who's had a wonderful career, blessed with a beautiful wife and lovely children and grandchildren, and who's very excited about where he is at this stage of his life and trying to share what he's learned on his professional journey.
And that journey was quite a journey.
Yes.
So, but let's go back. You were not born and raised here in Hampton Roads.
No, I'm from Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana. My home is about 30 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and I was born there, lived there until I went off to college.
Mm-hmm. And where does the name Schexnider come from? It is unusual.
It can be a tongue twister. It's of German origin, and it's from an area that's known as the German coast, which is in the river parishes in southeast Louisiana. My grandparents on my dad's side were from St. Martinville, which is the area where the Evangeline Oaks was written about, or the Evangeline Oak, I should say. Mm-hmm. And on my dad's side, Creoles for the most part, and that's where the name comes from. And it's been interesting in my career. When I first started working, I was in the private sector, worked for a company called Owens, Illinois. And so I was in human resources, then called personnel. And so my name would appear, and I can recall going to a workers' comp hearing one day, and people saw the name, but when I walked in the door, they were just totally shocked. And so I've had a little bit of fun with my name as well. So it's not just the pronunciation; it's the expectation that
it's not you.
It's not me.
I can appreciate that very, very much. So you, in your book, you talk about a couple of things that happened as you were growing up and so forth that shaped your perspective about race and ultimately about education, but race and racism in this country and how we're able to function. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things?
Yes. I mean, I think there are two incidents in particular that had a deep effect on me. The first was the execution of a black man when I was 9 years old. His name was Robert Sauls. And he was electrocuted in the parish. In Louisiana, parish is the same as a county. And so he had been charged with killing a deputy sheriff who was white, of course. And he claimed that this was in self-defense. He said he was innocent of the crime for which he had not been convicted, but he was arrested for, I think, a theft. But just the very idea of an electrocution was something that was terribly shocking. And
you were 9 years old?
I was 9 years old. And he had the electric chair. I mean, electrocution was the means of execution across the country, and particularly in the South. And before they decided that all electrocutions would occur at Angola. And if you know anything about prisons, Angola is one of the worst prisons in the world, populated mainly by people who look like you and me. But at that time, the electric chair was moved from parish to parish. And it was in Lake Charles, which was the seat of the parish where this occurred when I was 9 years old. And it just, I could never understand this, particularly, it just seemed to me inhumane, number one. And particularly since this man said, he had been arrested, understood that, but he felt this deputy was going to kill him, so he shot him first. And the other incident was
there a trial?
There were two trials. There were two, which is indicative of the fact that he may indeed have been innocent, because they had a second trial. At that time, if you were arrested for killing a white man, a trial in some cases was just out of the question. But Lake Charles was not as racist in its policies as other parts of the state.
Got you.
And so he had a second trial, but he was convicted a second time. And to the very end, he maintained his innocence. And the other incident was the lynching of Emmett Till. I was 10 years old in 1955, and I just thought that was, that could have been me. So, those two experiences had a profound effect on me and how I began to think about race and what it meant. My parents, particularly my father, insisted on knowing where we were at all times. We didn't really understand, but this was, their way of protecting us. And so if you left, home to go someplace, he knew, and my mother knew where we were, and particularly black males. There was no loitering or hanging around. And I didn't understand at the time, but it was their way of protecting us.
So there was a comportment rather, in terms of how you were to behave, you were to act.
Yes,
et cetera, that carried over into your adulthood.
Yes, and it that same set of expectations occurred in the school. I went to the same school my dad did, a Catholic school, Sacred Heart, from kindergarten through the 12th grade. And so the values that were instilled at home were reinforced in school and vice versa.
Was your school segregated?
Absolutely.
The Catholic school?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I finished high school in 1963, and it was absolutely. The nuns were all white. There was, I can recall, one Native American nun. The order was founded by Catherine Drexel, whose family very wealthy. Her dad was the founder of what's now Drexel Burnham Lambert. They funded the founding of Drexel University, and that order, Catherine Drexel also bankrolled the creation of Xavier University in New Orleans. And so, yes, the nuns were white. There were a few black lay teachers, but for the most part, they were white nuns who dedicated themselves to teaching what they call Indians and colored people.
So you went to Grambling?
Yes. Yes.
Mainly, did you ever think about going to a predominantly white institution, or was that not an option?
It was not an option. Oh, absolutely. In 1963, 95% or higher of people who looked like me attended historically black institutions. And so I actually, because I'd gone to a Catholic school, the expectation was that I was going to enroll at Xavier, which is in New Orleans, 220 miles east of Lake Charles, where my mother's youngest sisters, who were twins, graduated, and also where my oldest brother and an older sister attended. But after 13 years of the nuns, I was looking for a secular experience, and so I went to Grambling, and I'm glad that I did. It was a wonderful, one of the happiest periods in my life, frankly, were those years when I was at Grambling.
What made it so?
I think the fact that I was in the company of students, women and men who looked like me. The civil rights era really did shape the college experience. I was in college at a time that paralleled the civil rights movement and the anti-war, the Vietnam protest era.
So you had the socialization, the activism,
Yes.
all of that kind of
right
together.
And it helped, Barbara, to focus us on what was important in life. If we look at our history and we think of the founding of Bennett and Grambling and A&T and all of these 100 plus historically black institutions, they were created by women and men who wanted us to have a better life, a life that they knew they'd never enjoy. But they had a vision that if we were educated, we could begin to break down barriers. We could begin to improve the quality of life. We could begin to change the laws. And so when I was in college, during the civil rights era, we were really focused. I think college to some extent, and I'm going to be careful about how I say this, I think college to some extent today is sort of a rite of passage. It's something to do until you kind of figure out what you want to do. Well, when we were in college, you needed to know exactly what you were going to do, what kind of work, because the options were limited. And so, but we were very, very focused on breaking down racial barriers, helping others. I can recall even as a graduate student, when I should have been focused on my own studies, we were trying to help undergraduate students focus on their work. And not, of course, there's the racism to deal with because a lot of faculty just had little or no experience. They never heard of a place like Grambling.
Right.
And so we were trying to help other younger students, realize, yes, there's this thing called racism, but you've got to focus on why you're here. And so as a student, my life was strongly shaped by what was going on outside of the campus. And on April 4th, 1968, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was on my way to an African politics class at 6 o'clock. It flashed on the news that Dr. King had been assassinated. And so that too, helped to focus, what am I supposed to be doing with my life, and how can I make a difference? I just think it's different now, and that's good. But I think that my life, my time as a college student, and the beginning of my career were shaped strongly by what's going on, particularly regarding the civil rights movement.
So back in the day,
yes, yes,
as they say, pretty much black people were trained to be preachers, teachers,
yes,
or doctors.
Right.
Yes.
I
mean, that was the thing. But education at that point,
yes,
was not your career goal.
No. As a matter of fact, I didn't. I had, as I mentioned, my aunts finished Xavier, and they married, school teachers. And I wanted something different. And at that time, I can recall Lyndon Johnson, who was president, created something called the National. He didn't create it, but he got the corporate guys to create something called the National Alliance for Business. And Henry Ford II, who was at the time chairman of Ford Motor Company, also chaired this organization. And their goal was to get more and more people, black people, into the private sector, so that we could look at areas other than teaching or preaching or being an undertaker. And so I got a chance to work for Owens, Illinois, and Toledo, Ohio, as a personnel trainee. And I can recall getting transferred to Detroit in September of 1968. And this was just a year after the Detroit riots in 1967. And I can recall walking down Woodward Avenue in front of Hudson's, which I think was the biggest department store on Woodward Avenue. And just walking down, the street, I could see these white women clutching their purses as they approached me. And so, the city was still very tense. So here again, you talk about the era shaping who you are. And then I got drafted. I'd had 4 deferments. So 6 months after I began working in the private sector, I got drafted and sent to Vietnam. And in those days, you could get up to 90 days lopped off your tour of duty if you got admitted to law school, grad school. So I went to graduate school, never intending to have a career in higher education. Sorry, I know this. I am trying to answer your question and not give you a dissertation on the process. And so I went to graduate school because it got me out of Vietnam. I was 30 miles south of the demilitarized zone, DMZ as we called it. And so I, went to Northwestern and studied political science. And though I tried to escape having any kind of teaching career, but I got into administration fairly early. And
so what was it about higher education administration that attracted you? And tell us a little bit about some of your first positions and the things that you had to navigate, being, I would assume, if not the only, one of the only black men.
Yeah, people, some people talk about being the first. So many of us have been the first. I've never focused on that, but I've had many firsts. But my first academic administrative job occurred in 1979. I was recruited to become the dean of what's now the Wilder School at VCU. I was associate dean, and I was also on the faculty, and so I earned tenure there. And what drew me to academic administration was the opportunity to shape policies, provide leadership that would increase opportunities for African-American students, to be very, very honest with you. I mean, I wanted to be in a position where I could help others who were trying to do something with their life. And so I was associate dean at VCU. That's what's now the Wilder School. I hit that proverbial glass ceiling, and so I took a similar position at UNC Greensboro, which had been the women's college back in the day of the Women's College of UNC, because every southern state that had a university, and they were funded, as you well know, through the Morrill Act, were white male preserves. So, there's this women's college which had traditional degrees for women in Greensboro. And so I was recruited to create their first enrollment management unit because it had been identified as its history had been that of a women's college, and so my job was to recruit students and to change that, and I did, to expand it, and so we did, and so more males came, and then that meant that they had to change the curriculum to provide majors that would attract male students, and I really enjoyed that. But my background is political science, and so I really enjoyed being in Richmond because it was the seat of government. And I'd gotten very involved when I was at VCU in Richmond between 1979 and 84. I was involved with local and state government, knew my way around City Hall, knew my way around the Capitol. Mm-hmm. So I had a chance to come back to VCU as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs.
And you were there when you came back, I guess it was the second time,
mm-hmm.
where you bringing the two campuses together,
MCV
right. and VCU,
right.
Bringing them together and making that mold happen. What was the response to your leadership for those types of universities?
Challenging. That's the response. It was challenging. That's probably the nicest spin I can put on it. The two institutions came about as the result of what I call a shotgun marriage. I mean, you had two public institutions in the city that in many ways had duplicate administrative systems and so on. And so in 1968, the legislature created this new university, Virginia Commonwealth. And so when I was in that role, I was first hired as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, reporting directly to the Chief Academic Officer. And then my duties got expanded to that of Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies. And so I've always felt that the incumbent makes the role. You have a title, but what does that really mean? And so I wanted to do what I could to create a single undergraduate experience insofar as academic affairs, curriculum and academic programs are concerned. However, we were talking about two different cultures, and the folk on the MCV campus felt that we were not their equal. Mm-hmm. That is the academic campus. And so there was this tension because it was basically two different organizations, two different cultures, a lot of duplication of effort. And so I tried to do my part, which didn't make me popular, but that has never bothered me. I've never been seeking a popularity contest, but
you even talk about in the book. You talk about your decision making in terms of tact, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. Yes. I tend to be direct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I can recall a white colleague of mine who was a vice president for research at the time, and he meant well, but he said, you tend to be direct, and that's not something that white men in the South are, accustomed to. And I said, white men in the South? I mean, white men everywhere that I know. It's a challenge, but that's who I am. But yes, and so I think that if you're an African American, period, but particularly an African American male, you're always under scrutiny. You're always under a looking glass. And I'm thinking now about what happened to Dr. Gay at Harvard, the first African American woman to be appointed at Harvard president, and the charges of plagiarism. Well, now the same thing is happening to the president of the University of Maryland, College Park. I mean, he's being investigated for. So you don't forget, my youngest brother got elected to city council in my hometown back in the 80s, and I said to him, just understand that you can't do what the other guys do. You're under scrutiny. And of course, later, post-civil rights era, we learned that the FBI was keeping close tabs on black elected officials. And so, we've got to learn, and not that it's right or it's fair, but it's just real.
But that's the reality of it.
That's the reality of it.
You have to learn to deal with that.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. Alvin J. Schexnider, author of Confessions of a Black Academic, a memoir. Call us with your questions, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. You rose through the ranks. You became a college president.
Yes.
At Winston-Salem State University,
Right.
which is an historically black college and university,
Right.
an HBCU.
Right.
It was tough.
Yes.
How?
I think that every job that I've had, Barbara, I've been a change agent. That's just who I am. And change is tough. It's tough for all of us. I mean, I just upgraded to Windows 365, and I'm having to learn all over again. So I know it's tough. But I'm a product of an historically black institution. I think that these are iconic schools that they've accomplished so much. And quite frankly, there would not be a black middle class without historically black colleges and universities. But that does not mean that there's not room for improvement. And so I spent the bulk of my career in large research, i.e. white institutions. But I always had the desire, felt an obligation. I want to spend 10 years, the last 10 years of my career trying to make a difference at an historically black institution. And I went to Winston-Salem State with that expectation. But there's just a lot of resistance to change. I saw some things that I knew needed attention. One example, and again, I don't mean to, impugn any institution, but when I got to Winston-Salem State in January of 1996, my assistant, at least one of my assistants, was still using an IBM Selectric.
In 1996?
In 1996.
Wow.
And that very same year, Wake Forest announced that it would provide every entering freshman with a laptop. So
the disparities
yes.
in terms of what you need to be able to even serve as an academic institution were stark.
Yes. And so, of course, Wake Forest private school at that time had an endowment of close to, $750 million, but still. So we couldn't afford to give every student a laptop. But even then, students were coming to us. They'd had some experience with computers and technology, even in high school, and we weren't prepared. So we decided to use funds to first bring our faculty up to speed in the uses of technology. And of course, I made some changes in my own office and the other offices to invest in technology. But that's just one example of the kinds of changes that had, and people didn't, some didn't like it. The other thing that we did, and I'll never forget, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to, say this on the air, but we went to, in my first year there, we went to direct deposit, so that faculty, instead of
having to go cash a check every
the
week
check
or
went,
whatever,
went right to their checking accounts. Well, for some, that meant I didn't have to come to work today because my check is being deposited.
Wow. So you had to change a whole culture in addition to like technology is a thing.
Yes.
But you had to change a whole mindset.
Yes. While focusing on the essentials of leadership, with the faculty, staff, and got a lot of resistance from the president of the National Alumni Association, who happened to be on the staff. It was basically a sinecure. He wasn't doing very much. And so I ended up having to, go to court to deal with that. And this is not what you want to have to deal with, when you're trying to make a difference. But it's just a reality. And so I try to share that, again, not to embarrass or discourage or, impugn anyone, but just to give I wrote the book for people, particularly who think that they want to do this work.
So when you were at predominantly white institutions, you had microaggressions, you had things that you had to deal with in terms of race and racism.
Right.
When you went to Winston-Salem State, did you think prior to arriving, this will be a safe place? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I did, and I didn't.
Okay.
What I didn't appreciate, Barbara, was the fact that every organization has its own culture, its own way of doing things. And I always believed in doing things the right way and working hard. But that isn't an ethos that is shared by everyone. And so what I was totally unprepared for was a culture at Winston-Salem State. And, when you're a student, you don't see things the way you do when you're
running it.
Right, yeah. And so I was all for trying to bring, as I indicated with technology, I was all for, bringing the institution into the 21st century. And I can recall I stepped down after completing all of the changes that we needed to make to prepare for Y2K. Remember that era?
Yes, I remember that because everybody thought the computers were going to go crazy in 2000.
Right.
Yeah.
And so and we were getting ready for reaffirmation of accreditation at the same time was going to come in the spring. So, I think I probably did view going to an historically black place as a safe place, but I had such what John Dean describes as blind ambition. I was just so excited about the opportunity to share what I had learned over the course of more than 2 decades to make things better at an historically black institution. But frankly, I was naive. I just had no idea. I had the savoir-faire, the experience, the background, the knowledge, but I was just totally blinded to the resistance to change, the suspicions around who is this guy who has been at these white schools, doesn't really understand us. Even questions about, my name and my integrity. And so it was a steep learning curve for me.
But you didn't give up.
I did not.
And you kept going.
I did.
And I know that you spent time at UVA with the FBI Academy.
Yes, right.
FDI Academy. Right. And
learned a lot there.
And all that. But you also had ties right here in Hampton Roads with Norfolk State University.
Right.
And then Thomas Nelson, now Virginia Peninsula Community College.
Right.
So those experiences, what you took from your experience with Winston-Salem,
yes.
Did you do things differently at Norfolk State?
I did. And I have to give my wife credit for helping me understand what's called emotional intelligence. By nature, I'm an INTJ, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs. I'm an introvert, and many leaders are, but I have to work harder at it, at
being an extrovert.
At being an E, yes. And so my wife helped me understand. I can recall she bought a book that she insisted that I read, and it was basically about emotional intelligence. And I tend to look ahead, and I credit my father with that, who stressed the importance of planning and thinking ahead and being prepared. But not everybody thinks that way, and not everybody looks to the future. And I just want to be sure that our students were prepared for a global experience. And one of the largest gifts that we got when I was at Winston-Salem State was to provide a study abroad experience for students. And I'm very, very proud of that because, students, when I finished college, we were competing for jobs with graduates of Texas Southern and in Tennessee and Mississippi and Texas. But today's college graduates are competing with students from all over the world.
Right.
And so I wanted to be sure that our students were prepared for this. So I learned a lot from that experience at Winston-Salem State. And then when I came to Norfolk State, I had a specific, Dr. McDevitt gave me a portfolio that included three things. She wanted to create this RISE Center. She wanted to create a coeducational dorm. She wanted obviously to improve just the management of the institution. So I was hired as executive vice president, and we got the RISE building out of the ground. It's now the Marie McDevitt Center for Applied Research, and we got the co-ed dorm. Its first co-ed dorm. We acquired the old Norfolk Community Hospital, and the uses for that land have been I think worthy of the effort. We did some things to improve our relationship with the city of Norfolk, and because the things that you need to do to expand obviously require close collaboration with the city and the state.
So speaking of that, because that's one of the tenets that you talk about in terms of things that HBCUs in particular, in order to stay viable, in order to make sure that they have a place going forward, need to pay attention to.
Right.
And one of you talk about insularity.
Yes.
Explain what that means.
Yes,
and,
I'm glad.
And how that works.
If you think about the era in which our schools were founded, many of them, you were fortunate because you were at a college that's within a city, but there's so many, particularly small private and some public Black colleges that are located in rural areas. And there's a reason for that. It's because out of sight, out of mind. We didn't want you to have an education in the first place, and so you're going to be over here. This is where we got land, and so there was this antipathy toward educating Black folks. So if you're in some place that's not seen, fine, just don't bother
go
us.
over there as long you can do your thing.
Do
as
your
long
thing.
as you don't bother us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, so one of the things that I tried to do when I was at Norfolk State was to change that. We have a big homecoming, and their homecoming is this weekend.
Yes.
And so when I got here in 2002, even then there was this illumination parade. And it's downtown. It's kind of the beginning of the shopping season. Holiday season. And we weren't a part of that. And all of the buildings downtown put lights up.
Wow.
And
so
Norfolk
State wasn't a part of that.
Was not. And I don't know if they're still doing it, again, because I don't want to say anything that's untoward. But we got involved in that because we're proud of the band, and that's an asset. We want to be a part of something bigger.
So you want to make sure that people understand that the university is a part of the community.
Absolutely.
It's not just internal.
Absolutely. And you see, we'd have our homecoming parade, but it would just stay in that, within that perimeter.
Right within the perimeter.
And I wanted to get us out of that. Well, that was the way it was then. Today, Barbara, if you're not receiving support of the community, and not just the African American community, because folk are trying to raise money, but they need to know who you are and what you're standing for. And so, let me just finish this thought. And so I was trying to change that. But that's true for many Black schools. I mean, we all get, what it's like when you go back to your homecoming.
Right.
But you want to be the darling of the local community. They need to know what you're doing, what you're about. And so I think it's to our detriment that we are insular. I can understand, the reason for it, our origins. But if you want to raise money, you can't raise it just in the Black community.
Well, and it's interesting because I serve on several boards, and it was shocking to me once we were talking about holding a meeting. It just happened to be Norfolk State for that, but the majority of the board was non-African American, and they had never been on campus, B, believed whatever and were afraid to go on campus, and so if you're going to be able to stay viable, you really do have to make that connection. Howard University is in the city. Morgan State is in the city. I mean, they're big colleges and universities that are within a city area, but even the smaller ones. You talk about Talladega in the book, for example. Of it being outside the town of Talladega. And so making that connection and being relevant is really, really important.
It is. Well, particularly in, as I said, that was then, this is now, but you have to make the effort. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we did at Winston-Salem State, I'd invite, the chamber, because you're right, sometimes they don't know that it's the local community. Mm-hmm. They're fearful.
Or they say, I didn't know I could go.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And which is like, really?
Right. But again, you've got to work.
But you got to understand.
Yeah, you have to understand that and change that culture, because it's so easy to become even more insulated. But that doesn't work today. You need to be out there. When you hear Old Dominion mentioned, when you hear TCC mentioned, you need to hear Norfolk State mentioned.
Absolutely. What about, you talk about romanticism. Mm-hmm. What does that mean in terms of HBCUs?
Well, I think that, you can imagine, I talk in the book about how when we got our first television in 1956, I became fixated on Meet the Press. And so, I
should have been a journalist.
I look at events in life through a certain lens. And I think that sometimes we create these notions about an experience, and they are true, they are valid, but it has to be about more than, yes, we had a wonderful time, yes, I belong to a sorority, yes, I belong to a fraternity, but what are we doing to ensure that the institution is on a sustainable path? And we can get so excited about these romanticized notions of the college experience that we aren't focusing on what's
important,
really important,
which is how is the college going to move forward?
Right, because it can't be the same experience that you had when you graduated in 1995. It has to be different because the students are different. And so I think that's one of the challenges of higher ed, because oftentimes there are alums on the board or who are somehow involved in the life of the institution, and they want it to be the way it was when they were there. Yeah. But, if you are a liberal arts college and you're doing everything that you should be doing, it's possible, even likely, that your child or grandchild may not get admitted because the standards are going up, which is why they have legacy admissions. That's what it's all about. Because, matter of public record, President George W. Bush would not have gotten into Yale based on his grades had it not been for legacy admissions. Mm-hmm. And so because the standards keep going up, and we're seeing that right now, with Asian students, and that's the whole Harvard issue. Yeah. And so the romanticism, I think, can get in the way of looking forward at what you need to do in order to be strong and viable in the future.
Is there a different skill set for leaders of HBCUs?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry to let you finish your question.
No, that's fine.
Yes, there absolutely is.
Yeah.
And I think some are.
Explain why.
Well, because of the culture. Because of the culture, and I think also because of racism, where if you good example. When I got into the business of leading higher education, the job was pretty much that of an academic leader. It's changed now, Barbara. The average college president, if she or he is doing their job the way their board expects them to, they're spending at least half or maybe 3/4 of their time raising money. It's fundraising. And before you get antecedent to fundraising is what I call friend raising. So you're spending a lot of your time in the outside, space. If you don't understand that at an historically black institution, it can be difficult because we oftentimes don't want to deal with the vice president. Everybody wants to see the
Everybody
president.
wants the president. That's right.
It's a different culture. Now, if I got a problem at UVA, I go see the vice president or the dean. But in the African American experience, everybody wants the president's time. Well, the president doesn't have all of that time, and not everything needs to
rise to that level.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it means that you have to have the administrative apparatus, the infrastructure in place, so that you do have a vice president and a dean and a department chair who are responsive. Because if they're not, then folk want to see the person at the top. But it shouldn't be that way. But that's a cultural thing, and so you need to understand that and be prepared for it, because it's only 24 hours in a day. And so, but I also think that understanding the culture that I just described is so important. And no one explained that to me. I just thought that hey, all the stuff that I've been doing that's worked at these other places I've been is going to work here. Well, in a sense they did, but I've got to work through this other stuff first. Makes sense.
What about adaptability? You're saying the schools need to adapt
to change.
Change.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And the pandemic caught a lot of historically black institutions off guard because they had not invested as much in online learning as the other institutions. Some of them have made that adaptation now. But I guess I'm speaking of a leader who is aware of what's going on in the world around him or her, who's a visionary, who's doing everything that they can to ensure that the institution is prepared for the changes that we know are surely coming.
There was a stat, and I hope I got this right, but if I didn't, please correct me.
Sure.
You were saying that of all the black college students in the country,
yes,
90% go to PWIs,
yes,
and 10% go to HBCUs.
It's actually 9% now.
9% now. So
now,
it's gone down.
It's gone down.
Would you send your grandchildren to an HBCU?
Yes. If it's one that they wish to go to, I mean, it has to be their choice, and if I think it's a good fit. I think fit is important. I think there's a excuse me, there's a fit for every student. And some students do well in a small liberal arts environment. Some students do well in a single sex environment. I think it's a greater challenge if you're in a large university.
Yeah, I can't imagine being in a place where there's 400 people sitting in the room.
Right. So that's there's a fit for everyone. And so I would. My son went to Morehouse, had a good experience there, and our daughter went to VCU and had a good experience. It just depends on the person, but I do think that fit is important. And when I went to college, I didn't have a range of choices. I went to Grounding with a suitcase, a trunk, and a transistor radio. And so now students have all of these choices. But so the number of students who are enrolling at black colleges continues to decline. And the other thing that's of great concern to me,
because of the lack of because the endowments are so small, giving scholarships is an issue, et cetera.
Right.
So the money is a problem
the
too.
large schools with big endowments can apply more resources, more scholarships, because they've got endowments and so they can support scholarships. They do a better job of that. But my other big concern with regard to enrollment is the fact that on many college campuses, African-American males are in a minority. This year at Howard, 26% of the freshman enrollment is male. At some schools, it's almost 3 to 1. But that's an issue that we need to pay attention to and do something about. Not just look at it. We need to do something. We need to reverse that trend. Not enough African American males are enrolling in college and graduating, and there's some young sisters who can't buy a date.
Yeah,
it's a serious issue, and I think we need to address it in a direct way.
We got about 2 minutes left. The whole idea also of faculty, Black faculty.
Yes.
At HBCUs, at one time that was their haven. I
Absolutely.
mean, that was where they could actually
no place
go.
else to go. Yeah.
Do HBCUs suffer now because there's the ability to teach wherever?
I think they do. It depends on particularly in certain areas, where there's demand. I think it's harder to recruit both faculty and students at HBCUs now. I think it's harder to get faculty because they have options. Our high schools at some point, like Booker T and certainly Dunbar, and I don't know what the big major high school in Baltimore was, but you had people teaching in high schools, Black folk with PhDs, and they turned out some great students because they had limited options. Everybody couldn't be hired at Howard or Morgan, and so it's a challenge, and it's something that we've really got to pay attention to.
It's so interesting too because there's such a difference. You look at North Carolina A&T, for example, and the money and the expansion and all the things they're doing.
Right.
And then you look at teeny tiny Bennett, which is right across the railroad tracks.
Right.
That is struggling.
Right.
And so there's such disparity even within the family of HBCUs, if you will.
Well, private schools are in a difficult place because you need to have, private resources. Your public institution, your taxpayer supported, you got more resources. And if you use them wisely, you can do some good things. But I think it's really hard for private schools, both black and white. You recall a decade ago, Sweetbriar was about to be closed, and the alumni, the women raised $31 million in 1 year to keep the doors open, and they are now on a good path. Did it? Can we do that?
Yeah,
so
it's
tough.
You got to get all the pieces to come together at one time.
Right.
Dr. Schexnider, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's
been a pleasure. I really am honored to be here.
Thank you. The name of the book is Confessions of a Black Academic, a memoir, and it is really, really good reading. So be sure to check it out. And audience, thank you so much for spending an hour of your life with us here on Another View. Now, you can listen to this program anytime at WHRO.org/anotherview or on Spotify or wherever you go for your broadcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View, your favorite cardiologist, Dr. Keith Newby, will be with us with another view on health, and we're going to have a special guest, Eric Claville, who will have a prediction about the upcoming election. If you know, with the Claville Report, he has a prediction every time we have a presidential election. So we will bring that to you next week. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. November 2nd is the last day to vote early, so time is running out unless you plan to vote on election day. Bottom line, go vote. We'll get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.